like that would be for me if I was a fan. I feel like that'd be kind of cool. Like my favorite band, Emery, Toby. I know his favorite band is Weezer. So like sometimes whenever I hear a Weezer influence come through, I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I see where that's coming from. So that's the goal here, is to get to know you, Vince. And basically we're going to talk about your story. So like, where did it start music wise? And I know, I think out of all of us, you've been in music probably the most, but like, I guess let's start there. So like how old were you when you first started listening to music? You noticed music, maybe first favorite band, first instrument, those kind of things.
First of all, off topic, but who's interviewing you?
I don't know. I might just talk with Aaron because it flowed pretty well when we talked that one day. And then I'll just lead the discussion. Okay. Just so I'm not talking to myself.
Okay. So anyway, my music background starts when I was the age of 2 years old.
Wow.
So I had a grandmother on my mom's side. We called her Mimi. But she kind of played piano, and she had a keyboard, like one of those old 1980s, like Yamaha keyboards. Mm-hmm. You can picture them. They're black with all the buttons and stuff on it, and they made those silly sounds. And so she had one of those. And I don't remember this. My memories don't go back that far. But the story was that my family came over for a visit, and my grandmother apparently did the thing that you'd sometimes do with tiny little kids, is where you kind of shape their into a finger, and she had the keyboard on. So she took my hand and she guided it over the notes to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, like do, 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 do. And I was like, oh, it's so cute. We're making him play a song, you know? And so my family left, and we didn't come back and visit my grandma for another like 2 months or whatever. It was a long time. So the story goes that next time we had come back and visited my grandma, they were like in a room, and I was a toddler. So I was like toddling around at 2 years old. And then they heard music coming from my grandma's room, and they're like, what, did something get turned on or something? Well, apparently I had toddled my way into my grandma's room, and I had turned on her keyboard, and I was playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star exactly as she had moved my hand 2 months prior. And so that was the first indicator to my family that like, oh, this kid has like something musical going on. So that was the beginning, I guess you would say.
Did you start like, I mean, did anything come of that? Like, did you start dabbling more from there, or did just some more time go by before you were able to like pick up an instrument and start?
Some more time went by. That was the first time my family kind of recognized that I might have some musical talent. So, my parents worked pretty hard to try to find me a piano teacher, but they don't teach 2-year-olds how to play piano.
Right.
So they really couldn't find me a piano teacher until I was about 5. And even at 5 years old, that's kind of like, if you're a piano teacher, you're like, I don't know about a 5-year-old. But they found a piano teacher that was willing to give me a shot at 5 years old. And she was kind of hesitant, and her name was Mrs. Ennis. And so they brought her to me, and again, not in my memory, but the story goes, they dropped me off at her house for 30 minutes and to have my first lesson. And she was like, I don't know if he's not really old enough to learn this. And, they came back 30 minutes later to pick me up, and she was like, your son has an amazing gift, and I want him to study with me, like from now on. Like it was a major tone shift from, I don't know if I want to teach this little kid to like, I want this kid as my student. So
let me jump in real quick because what I think is funny about this, I love how you keep saying the story goes, because it's kind of like, it's almost like mythological. Like, well, the legend goes like this, and I think people who don't know you hearing this are like, oh, okay, yeah, that's probably a little embellished, or whatever. But being somebody, myself or Aaron or Nick, being somebody who's been with you in the studio and seen you in action, it's like, oh yeah, everything you're saying makes sense. Cause like, when we go into the studio together, there's lots of times where I'll come in with something like, hey, I'm kind of feeling like a da-da-da, and it's going to kind of have this vibe, and I'm thinking maybe kind of like a sad sounding, and they're like, oh yeah. And then you make all of things happen. Like when, I don't know, I'm just, blowing smoke up you or whatever, but like, it's true. Like the myth is true. I've seen it in person. So it's really funny that it started at 2 years old. I totally believe it.
I appreciate that. So basically from the age of 5, basically up until about high school, freshman, sophomore year of high school, I kind of quit taking official lessons in high school. By that time, I was already pretty decent at piano, and that kind of opens up sort of the next chapter. But from the age of 5 to the age of about 15, I was a classically trained pianist. Like, that was the only instrument that I played. And from an early age, due to my piano teacher, I grew to learn to love the works of Beethoven and Mozart and Chopin. Those are my earliest musical influences. Like, if you met 10-year-old me, I didn't know about, I don't know, whatever 90s bands were hot at the time, Alice in Chains or
Nirvana.
My dad was a big rock and roll fanatic, but I never really got into it. I couldn't name any of the classic rock bands or Nirvana or any, like, I couldn't even, wouldn't even have been able to name you any bands. I did not care about any music whatsoever except for classical piano. That's what I was all about. And that was basically what consumed me from the age of 5 until the age of 15.
That's awesome. So like, are you saying that like around the age 15 is when you first started to discover those other bands, or like when would you say that started?
Yeah, so it was around the age of 15. I was about a freshman in high school. And like I said, my dad was really into classic rock, and it never really sparked anything for me. I was like, yeah, it's cool. Bunch of old guys like singing really high falsetto voices. And the funny thing is I still feel that way about classic rock. I'm still not a huge fan of it.
Right.
But one day I was a freshman in high school, and my dad brought home Godsmack's self-titled album. I think it was released in 1999. And that was a little bit of a departure for my dad. He wasn't known for listening to like more modern music, and probably right around that era, that 1999, 2000s era, is where I consider that, modern rock and modern metal first got its start, that modern production sound with the really super wide guitars and the in-your-face sound and the super punchy drums. It kind of didn't exist before that. I mean, you could kind of say it had its roots in the 90s, but it really didn't come to fruition until right around that time. So my dad brought that album home, and I used to listen to like classical piano CDs while I was mowing the lawn. Mowing the lawn was one of my chores, and I didn't want to be bored while I was doing it. So I used to listen to a bunch of Beethoven and Mozart and stuff while I was mowing the lawn. And one day I just saw my dad's Godsmack album. It was laying out. He had been listening to it, and I was like, I'm just on a whim. I was just like, I'm just going to check this out. Like, just do something different. A little tired of Mozart today. So I'm going to mow the lawn and I'm going to listen to whatever this is. And I popped on my, dating myself here, popped on my anti-skip, portable CD player. With the cheapo 90s plastic headphones with the real small, ears on it. And I was pushing the push mower around the yard and I listened to this Godsmack album and I was like, I don't know. It just hit me. I was like, this is unlike anything I've heard before. It's just so powerful. Like that's right. The feeling I remember getting from it. It's just like, it's just so punchy and it's just so powerful. And then I listened to that album so much that my dad was like, give me my album back. You're going to wear it out. Use your lawn mowing money and go buy your own music. So I went out and bought that Godsmack album, and then Stained was coming out around the same time. And they were kind of, again, that transition into modern rock. And so I got their music and I fell in love with it. And Linkin Park came out in 2000, Hybrid Theory. And I got that album. And from then on, I was just hooked on this heavy modern rock sound. Like that I fell in love.
Something that jumps out at me about that is something Aaron and I talked about in his episode is like, it seems like transitioning from like classical. I don't know classical music obviously as well as you do, but it seems like you would go from this elegant, expressive. I mean, I know they have major and minors and all that kind of stuff, but it seems like stepping into Godsmack and these other bands, you're stepping into aggressive, angry stuff. Like, is there anything there that comes to mind? Like, I mean, you're going from like peaceful music to angry music.
Well, without giving a dissertation on, the history of classical music, because nobody wants to hear that, but I can summarize it by saying there's a lot of emo in classical music. I would say a lot of, when I say emo, I just mean an emotional vibe overall, especially in the composers of the late classical and romantic era, like Beethoven, Chopin, some of the more famous ones. Their music was very powerful and very emotional. It just was conveyed in the context of the instruments that they had at the time, which would have been piano or some sort of orchestral setting. But I mean, I could show you some compositions by Rachmaninoff that might bring you to tears, Dustin. There's a couple still to this day that I listen to, and it reaches inside of you and it grabs that, that emotional part of you. And
do you think anger as well? Like they touched on that emotion too?
Definitely. Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Anger, sadness, the negative emotions, and Godsmack and Stained and Linkin Park, and they also tapped into that sort of negative, I would say negative emotional space. And I don't think this is the place or the time to go into why I was drawn to a negative emotional space versus a positive emotional space. I'll just say that there are reasons that I was drawn more to that negative side, and there's reasons that spoke to me more than just like happy, peppy, like pop music,
Yeah, it's a Maroon 5 or something, whatever. That's interesting. So, okay, where did it go from there then? So that was like 15 around then. You discovered this modern rock kind of stuff. Did that? I'm guessing that kind of led to like, hey, I'm going to pick up a guitar. I think I want to play this kind of music.
Yeah. So at around the age of 15, my grandma on my dad's side got me an acoustic guitar for I think it was my 15th birthday. And to be honest, I play acoustic guitar a lot more now than I ever did back then. I was not interested in acoustic guitar by that point. I was already into Godsmack and Stained.
Yep.
And in the beginning, I just had that acoustic guitar. I really wanted an electric guitar, and that wouldn't come until later. But I really wanted to reproduce that, like heavy distorted guitar sound. So
yeah.
Somewhat embarrassingly, I will admit that at the beginning, when I had that acoustic, I stole my little sister's Barbie karaoke machine. And I learned that if I put the crappy plastic Barbie karaoke machine mic really close to the strings and wailed on it, then the sound that came out of the Barbie karaoke speaker was somewhat distorted. And my sister used to come into my room. Like it was a problem at one point. My parents had to be called in, have a meeting. Like, Vince, you need to stop stealing your sister's Barbie karaoke machine. Like,
I love it. Quit playing with my Barbies.
So I think that was 15. I got the acoustic guitar. Around the age of 16, my parents bought me my first electric guitar, and it was just, one of those cheap off-brand Stratocaster lookalikes. And, I started kind of fumbling around with it and like learning to play it. I had an amp. I didn't have a distortion pedal. I didn't even know that distortion pedals existed. But I learned if I cranked my tiny little amp all the way up, I could get a little bit of distortion. But throughout, my teenage years in high school, I didn't totally lose my love for classical music. I still enjoyed playing classical stuff on piano. I was part of band in high school. So I played the trombone in band, and I was part of choir, and I was part of musical theater as well. And my freshman year of high school, the musical theater department put on the play Little Shop of Horrors, which is a really cool musical. And also in that musical was a guy by the name of Josh Collins. And I don't remember the exact circumstances of our meeting, but we met, like being in that musical together. And I think he approached me. He had seen me playing guitar. I'd brought my guitar to school or something like that. And he was like, hey, me and my brother are like looking to start a band. Do you play guitar? Because I play bass and my brother plays drums. It would be like really cool because we're like looking for a guitarist. And I was like, that just blew me away. Like the idea, like I could be in a band, like, whoa. So I was really excited about that. And so he's like, why don't you come over to my house? This was Attica, Seneca East High School. And so one day we arranged it, and I went over to his house, and so I was really friends with Josh first, and and then I met his brother Aaron, and that was another gigantic turning point in my life. Because while like Josh was cool and everything, and I got along with Josh great, and he was a cool guy. But kind of going back to that negative emotion thing, I don't know. I met Aaron, and Aaron was much more of sort of an emotional character than Josh was. He just had a lot more emotions to him. So when I started like talking into Aaron and like getting in a conversation with him, like things would just get real deep really easily.
Right.
We'd get real deep, and we'd go into that negative space and kind of, I'd say in a healthy way, in a good way, we'd explore that. And we shared a lot of like really deep, fears and, things that were going on in our lives and things we were struggling with that were important to us back in that time. And I had never really shared that kind of a friendship connection with anybody in my life prior to that. I had just had friends where, you go over to their house for sleepovers, you play video games together,
right, yep.
You go to camp together. Aaron was my first friend that it was like, whoa, we're hitting on some like really deep personal levels here. And like, it was instantly like the closest friendship I had ever had. And then we had also found out that when we get together and wrote music together, like that clicked really, really well as well. So, I mean, Aaron and I just instantly became best friends. We were inseparable. I mean, it was to the point where, you know, Josh even came out later and he admitted he was jealous. So at one point he's told me he felt like I stole his brother from him.
Mm-hmm. I get that. I mean, I had a similar experience when I met Aaron. He's a powerful personality, and he does have a way of maybe it's because he's so transparent and he wears his heart on his sleeves. It brings it out of others, which fosters a friendship that's just very deep and intimate, and it's very cool. So I definitely know what you're saying.
Yeah.
So three of you started the band together. Do you remember what that band was called? I think Aaron mentioned it in his episode.
That band was called Shatterday.
Shatterday.
Originally, Shatterday was a cover band. So we covered popular songs of the time. So like Papa Roach, Last Resort. I learned that. I learned some Blink-182 songs. We learned some like Linkin Park songs. And we played like a few birthday parties where we would just play these like secular like cover songs. Mm-hmm. But you know, this is where kind of religion and the church, it plays a big role in my story. So just kind of bringing that in. Aaron's parents are and always have been very religious, sort of evangelical Christian. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't long after we formed the band, probably a few months, where Aaron and Josh, I didn't get to go with them, unfortunately, because my parents couldn't afford it, but they went to a live festival for the first time. And for people that don't know what Alive is, it's one of the biggest, you know, Christian music festivals there is. Mm-hmm. Still to this day. It's just really huge. And, you know, this was a revelation for all three of us at the time. Like, we would go to church and we would sing these church songs, and then we would meet as a band after school and we would play our heavy, angry music. We had no idea that you could combine those two things. And so Aaron and Josh went to this Alive festival, and they saw bands like Spoken, Pillar, mm-hmm. Seventh Day Slumber. Spoken was like a really, really big one. And these were guys that were out there doing, not only was it heavy, angry rock, but they were Christian as well. Like, they were heavy, angry rock, but they were making Christianity the center of their music point. And Aaron and Josh came back from that Live festival, and I could just tell they were just transformed by that experience. And of course, they were heavily encouraged by their parents, of course, that wanted to see them go down that Christian route. And so Aaron and Josh were the first ones that kind of proposed to me, like, you know, what if we did like Spoken is doing and do heavy rock, but also make it Christian? And, you know, at the time, I didn't care. I just wanted to make good music. So I was like, yeah, whatever you guys want, man. I'm on board. We want to make this about Jesus. Then I'm like, let's do it. So then Shatterday was born, and that's when we really started writing like original music. And I remember at the time, Aaron was on drums, Josh was on bass, I played guitar. And the idea was, I was the lead singer. I was like, I'm only going to lead sing until we find a singer. Once we got to find a singer, because even then I knew that like I didn't have the best lead singing voice in the world. But I was like, okay, I can hit notes, so I'll sing until we find a singer. We never found a singer. So I was the lead singer of Shatterday for like 4 years while that band was together.
That's pretty funny. Well, I mean, and honestly, that could still work because, like, I don't know, the lead singer voice is a very subjective thing. I mean, like, Me Without You is a really big band in the scene, and their lead guys, I mean, I don't know their music super well, but he's not like the lead singer voice, but what he does artistically and vocally and stuff. So it could have happened.
And the interesting thing for the super fans out there that listen to both Aaron's podcast and my podcast, when I first met Aaron Collins, he couldn't sing a note to save his life. All I knew is in Saturday, I loved harmony. I've always loved harmony. Just the like two or more voices coming together and singing those notes, those lines that went together. So when we started Saturday and I was lead singer, I wrote all these melodies and stuff that were in my head, but always in my head, just like Stained and Linkin Park and all these bands we were being influenced by, they always had this backup singer that was doing these really cool harmonies. And it just, all I knew in my little high school brain is that just made it sound so much better. So I insisted, like, we have to do this. And Josh was like, no, not me. I'm not doing it. So I kind of pointed at Aaron and I was like, Aaron, you're doing this. You're singing these backup vocals. And we went through a little period for a while where Aaron, like, he didn't know how to match pitch. He didn't know like how to hit the notes, and I would make ugly faces at him. And I wasn't going to say, I'm not going to say I'm an amazing teacher or anything, but through trial and error, Aaron learned from originally kind of learned the basics of singing from me. Mm-hmm. And, now I consider him probably the best vocalist I've ever met in my entire life. He surpassed me and pretty much any other voice that I know.
Yep. He took it and ran with it for sure. So, how did I kind of already know the answer to this, if I remember correctly, but how did Saturday end?
I think Saturday didn't really have a clear-cut ending, but the way I describe it is Saturday didn't really end. It just kind of morphed. So once Saturday decided to become a Christian band, Aaron's parents, Tammy and Rob, they got behind the band and they decided they were going to do everything they could to support Saturday. I am really grateful for everything they did. They sacrificed a lot from their position as parents. They had full-time jobs. They were working. I wasn't fully capable of appreciating it at the time, but now being an adult and being a parent and looking back on everything they did, they bought Saturday the first PA system, and they spent a lot of money on the band. They spent a lot of late nights going to our various concerts at different churches and stuff. And Rob, he kind of learned the basics of running sound, and he ran our sound for us. And Tammy did a bunch of pictures and scrapbooks, and they helped us print our album, and they put in a lot of work to help Saturday out. So they were extremely supportive. But they also, along with that support, came the expectation that they had a certain level of control over it too. So the idea was, we would only practice at Aaron's house because that's where his parents could have the supervision and the control over everything. And right. So there came a point when, we were kind of aging out of high school and getting to the point where we're becoming adults. And you know how you are when you're at that age, you kind of want to get away from your parents. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where we hit this thing. And Saturday went through a few rough transitions. I was out of the band for a while. I was back in. They had some people out, some people back in. And eventually we brought new people on, and we wanted to change the music style up a little bit to something a little heavier. By that point, we had discovered, this is probably around like 2005, 2006. We had discovered bands like Killswitch Engage. Still Christian influence, but there was a little bit lighter on the Christianity, a little bit heavier on the music sound itself. And Aaron's parents, they weren't necessarily supportive of that style. I mean, they just didn't, it was a little bit too far for them because then the vocals kind of turn into the screaming stuff.
Yep.
And they kind of saw that as maybe a little bit of a departure for Christianity. And then with the other members of the band, we had the idea, our buddy Wes, who was in the band, he had a dedicated like shed at his house, which was completely empty, and it had like a lot more space than we had at Aaron's house. So we were like, let's practice over there. Well, Aaron's parents weren't really on board with that either, with the location change and them not being able to supervise. I'm not judging them for it because, again, they supported the heck out of us, and I'll be eternally grateful for that. But they basically drew a line in the sand and said, we can no longer support this. Basically, we can no longer support this change in your style and the fact that you want to get out of the house and practice at a different place. So if you decide to do this, then we're taking away your PA system. We're taking away all your equipment, and then you can go out and figure it out on your own. We are no longer going to support this. And like the good, like seniors in high school to freshmen and college age people we were like, well, yeah, F you, we will figure it out on our own. And so based on that break from parental supervision to we want to do this on our own, Shatterday became a band called Leading the Wake, which was a Christian metal band. Huge style change. The two bands don't sound anything alike. Shatterday was very clearly Christian rock, like acceptable to hear in a church setting. Mm-hmm. Whereas Leading the Wake was metal.
That's very interesting. I love hearing this. I love hearing you tell the story compared to how Aaron tells the story, because you both hit different parts, and it's almost like I feel like you're very thoughtful in how you say it, and it follows logic, and Aaron is very emotion. So like Aaron was, when he told this story, it was like, yeah, we were in this band called Shatterday and it was going pretty good for a while. And then my parents kicked Vince out of the band. And that was kind of that was kind of it. Like, and I was like, what do you do? And I tried, and that was kind of where it was left. And it was like, okay, well then some time passed and then we started Leading the Wake. So it's very funny. I'm excited for people to hear both episodes because it's almost like you have the timeline chronological, how everything actually connects. And Aaron's just kind of like big highlights kind of thing.
I kind of forgot about that part. Actually, Aaron's mom did kick me out of the band, and it was because our moms got into a fight with each other. It wasn't anything that happened in the band. It was, Aaron's mom has a very strong personality. She knows who she is, and she's very opinionated, and she's very outgoing with her opinions. And my mom happens to be the same way. And there was this one culminating show. It was one of the last shows Shatterday ever did. And it was kind of it was a catastrophe. Like everything that could have went wrong. Like,
yep.
Our moms got into this huge fight, and my mom kind of called Tammy a bad Christian, which really lit Tammy up. And not only was it the parents fighting, but like we went to do the show and it rained on our equipment and our equipment failed on us while we were at the show. And it was just sort of this great catastrophe. And then after
was there,
go ahead.
Sorry, was there friction because of that? Because your mom and Aaron's mom had issues. Did that cause friction between you and Aaron, or were you both kind of like, well, it's just, our moms, whatever, we'll figure it out?
Absolutely not. I remember Aaron's parents sat me down that night and they said, well, we've realized, and they used the biblical term, we've realized that you're unequally yoked.
Unequally yoked.
Yep.
Classic. Yep.
So that was sort of the biblical foundation they laid for why I should no longer be involved with Shatterday. And
Aaron was cool with that?
Nope, not at all.
Okay.
After they kind of walked inside, Aaron and I were both, I remember there was a fire in Aaron's backyard. We had a fire on the fire ring, and Aaron and I both sat there and we looked at each other and we go, this sucks. Like, this is awful. Like, we just had the worst show of our lives. His parents kicked me out of the band. Like, we didn't really have a say in the matter. And Aaron's right. That is one of probably the major like stepping stones that led to us striking out on our own and saying like, you don't want Vince in the band. You want all this control. Like, oh, fine. We'll go out and do it on our own.
So it's interesting how that is like big, terrible tragedy, but those are oftentimes the transition points in life where let's learn. What we're learning here is maybe not letting other people have so much control over our thing. So interesting. So I'm also curious, you mentioned in Chatterday, you played a lot of birthday parties and stuff. I'm sure you played like churches, maybe like youth groups, that sort of thing. Did that change when you went into leading the wake? So now you're Christian metal. It's not so much, like we joke about now, if MITM played a show at some like benefit thing, we would scare people away maybe. Did you start to encounter that with leading the wake where it's like, oh, maybe churches don't want us anymore?
Oh, it was really funny actually, because in Chatterday, we were just so used to playing the church scene and the youth group scene, and we already had a bunch of contacts and networks in that scene. And leading the wake we did profess to be a Christian band, and our lyrical content, I would say, it was very Christian. So we just tapped into that same network and that same scene to get shows. And our first year was hilarious because we get booked at some Baptist church way out in the boonies. And I remember this one show in particular, but we showed up, leading the wake is setting up. Now, granted, we are a hardcore metal band along the lines of like Killswitch Engage and Lamb of God, some heaviness that if you weren't into metal at the time, then, music that heavy was kind of unheard of. Like, they was still being developed at that time, So we'd show up at these backwoods churches and the pews would just be full of these really old people, and they showed up to hear this lovely Christian band. So there was this huge disconnect between, I don't know, I guess I wouldn't say what we advertised ourselves to be, because we didn't advertise ourselves to be a worship band per se. But when we were booking shows, these pastors that were booking us at their churches, they didn't know what metal meant. They just thought, oh, they're, they're Christian, but they got a rockin' vibe, So they would just book us, and we would just play in these pews just filled with like old ladies with their dogs, and they're ready to hear the Christian band. And we would play our first song, and Aaron would start screaming, and just the look of disgust from the audience members, and people were just filing out. Like, all these old people were just like, like covering their ears and just like running out of there like they were running away from a plague. And it was a very cringy experience. Yeah.
Leading the wake could clear a room.
It was rough. Once in a while, we did get to play some cool shows. We played a high school party one time where some guy just set a PA up in his backyard. Aaron has a story about having to plug something in halfway to get it to work. I don't know if he mentioned that or not, but it was just a interesting side bit. But whenever we played for like a younger audience, things went really well. And then Leading the Wake did shift. It was that first year we were just clearing out churches left and right. And then finally we decided, okay, it's enough of this. And that's when we started booking bars. So yeah, that's when we started like booking, we would just play at hole in the wall bars or anywhere. Battle of the Bands, Peabody's in Cleveland. That's when I got my first experience in, okay, we're out of the churches now. Now we're playing actual venues. People are booking us, and the people that are watching us actually came to hear a metal band. So
you're more well received.
Oh, absolutely. Leading the Wake was very
Even
well.
Though, did you guys Leading the Wake have like a preaching segment? Like in between songs, hey, we just want you guys to know that Jesus loves you, and that's the reason we're here tonight. Did you do that in bars at all?
Yeah, I'd say we did it was a lot less. Shatterday was more a ministry than it was a band.
Right.
And I'd say when Leading the Wake started, we flipped the script. It became more about the music and less about the ministry. I mean, Shatterday had we would invite people and they would spend an hour and a half like giving their testimony, like story in the middle of our set. Like that was part of our show. Mm-hmm. We would play these all-nighters at youth groups. Like you would go from 8 at night till 8 in the morning, this 12-hour long sessions where we would go up, we'd play for 2 hours, and then somebody would give a testimony. I would give my testimony. We'd play for another 2 hours. I mean, it was just this crazy thing.
Right.
So when Leading the Wake started playing bars, we were still pretty strong Christians, all of us. But we knew we weren't going to hold people with hour-long testimonies and stories and stuff.
Yep.
But, by the time we got to Leading the Wake, Aaron was the lead singer, and, he would oftentimes say, hey, this, we're here, we're doing this for Jesus, and we just want to let you know that, Jesus loves you. It was a very positive message. Mm-hmm. He didn't stand up there and like preach hellfire and condemnation. He just stood up there and preached positivity and love. And the funny thing is, the Christian message in the bar was received so much better than the metal music in the church was.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. I was curious.
So, the metal music in the church people flat out rejected it. They were disgusted, and we were basically forced out of that scene. And for the most part, when we would go into a hole in the wall bar with all these kids with the gauges in their ears and all the scary devil people, even though Aaron stood on stage and said, hey, we're here for Jesus, we would often have times people come up to us after the show and be like, man, I've never heard a Jesus band that was that heavy. Like, I don't care if you're for Jesus or not. Like, that was awesome. Like, you guys did excellent. Right. Like, they weren't judgmental about the Jesus message because they loved the music. So
yeah, that's a very interesting comparison. Another thing, you learn a lot. You got your experiences, and now you're seeing that element of it as well.
Yep.
So how did things go transitioning out of Leading the Wake into what comes next?
So this is where my story and Aaron's story kind of diverges and separates a little bit. Because after high school, I kind of fell in with a new group of friends, and Aaron went off to college. I mean, Aaron was at college for a long time. So after high school, I didn't go to college right away. I had a bunch of friends, and I just wanted to hang around, and I fell into a pretty good job at an electronics factory. And so I was making pretty good money. And in my off time, I just had all these friends, and we'd had all this free time. And so, from age 20 to age 25, I just dorked around with my friends and did a bunch of stupid stuff and just had a bunch of fun. Aaron went to college right away. So Aaron and I kind of separated a little bit there. And so when I was, just kind of doing my after high school, just having fun, living life thing, I joined this band called Chasing the Sirens, which was another metal band. It was my first band that I was in that wasn't Christian. But but it was a really cool metal band with another really great group of guys. Same drummer from Leading the Wake. And then Aaron, when he went to college, I don't speak too much for him because he already spoke for himself, right. But that's when Aaron he got into his college stuff, the Jesus Saves project. I'm sure he probably talked about that. And so that's really where our stories diverge. So for my part, I joined another metal band, Chasing the Sirens, and continued to play the bar scene and do Battle of the Bands. And I did that for another whole 5 years, while Aaron was in college. And at age 25, my story changes drastically.
Sorry, I have to give you a pause to take a drink.
So you wanted to know about the next chapter now?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm just listening and you got me steeped in anticipation because I don't know this story.
Okay. So, I was in Chasing the Sirens doing my own thing, and I had a decent job, but I was living in Willard, and I had lived in Ohio my whole life, and one by one, my friends started to go off and do other things. A couple of them moved down to Florida. A couple of my friends went away to the military. I had 2 friends that went and joined the Marines. And so this kind of nonstop party I had going on where it was like every day I got to have fun and hang out with my friends. It really kind of started to dry up. All my friends were going off and making big decisions about their lives and doing things as an adult. So naturally, I eventually kind of found myself being alone a lot and just working this same job I had worked for 5 years, which in your 20s, 5 years seems like an eternity.
Right.
And, I didn't go to college after high school or anything. So outside of that decent job, I didn't really have any great prospects or anything. And I wasn't spending that much time with friends anymore. And, a relationship that I had in my early 20s kind of broke off. So I found myself like single again. And so I kind of came to this point in my life where I kind of had to make a decision because I really wasn't happy anymore. Like just working a 9 to 5 and really coming home to nobody. So I kind of just made the decision. Like I knew I wanted to get out of Ohio. If you would have asked me when I was 25, I would have told you I hate Ohio. I hate it here. It's the worst state ever. It's too cold most of the year. Everybody here sucks. Like I would have given you a million reasons why Ohio is the worst state and why I'm going to leave and I'm never going to come back. So that was my attitude toward where I lived. And I, kind of batted it back and forth, but I eventually came to the decision, what? Music's been this huge part of my life. It's the only thing I've ever really been good at. I wasn't ever good at anything else in school. I was music. It was like the only thing I knew, the only thing I knew I could succeed at. So, I decided I was going to go to college for music. Like, why not? Like, at least give it a shot. If I would have stayed in that, that job for the rest of my life, I would have regretted not giving it a try. Now, to make a long story short, during that transition period, I had mentioned a lot of people in my life up and left. One of those people in my life that up and left were my parents. I was born and raised in Ohio, of course, but in 2008, I want to say, my parents, they took off to Arizona. Basically because my mom had asthma. She had a bunch of respiratory issues. Mm-hmm. And she was seeing all these doctors and she was doing really, really bad in Ohio. Her health was not good. And the doctor basically told her, like, you gotta move somewhere else. Like, you gotta move somewhere where the climate's warm and dry. Like, you can't stay in Ohio, or else your health is just going to continue to decline. So that was my parents' reason for, up and leaving to Arizona. And I kind of helped them move and everything. So when I decided I was going to go to college for music, I was like, well, I'm going to have to quit my job. I don't know how I'm going to support myself. 25, I'm still pretty young. So I called up my parents and I was like, hey, how would you guys feel if I quit my good paying job and I came to Arizona and moved in with you, and you guys support me while I go to college for music? And somehow I convinced them to say yes to that.
College is a worthy, that's a good goal. That's something to support.
Yeah. So I did. I had a 4-door Dodge Stratus sedan. Didn't fit very much. I packed it with everything that I owned. I left a bunch of stuff behind, a bunch of music equipment. I gave Wes an amp that he still has to this day, and I gave a bunch of stuff away. And I packed everything that was important to me in that tiny little car, and I drove 2,200 miles across the country to go live in a state that it was like moving to Mars, man. Like,
yeah, I bet
you spent your entire life in Ohio and you've never been anywhere else. Moving to a place like Arizona is just, it's like culture shock. It's crazy. It's a completely different experience.
I can imagine that, because that describes me. I mean, I've always been here, and I'm down here. I live in Hardin County, so we got like Amish buggies all around us, and like, the closest Target is an hour away. we're boondocks around here, so I don't ever see hills. I mean, Northwest Ohio is flat, so for me to like we just went to Florida for a little vacation, and driving through Kentucky and Tennessee and seeing hills and trees, I was blown away. It was like, I might as well have been looking at the Grand Canyon at that point. And then when I get down to Florida, where the climate's different and there's different trees and there's all this kind of stuff, like, it really was like you said, being on Mars. So I can't imagine like backing up and moving to Arizona. Like, that would be cool.
And Arizona's, I mean, if you've never been there, it's an absolutely gorgeous state. I mean, it's just beautiful. The desert and the saguaro cactuses and, the America the Beautiful. They talk about the purple mountains majesties. I always thought that lyric was strange. During sunset, the mountains really do turn purple, and it is majestic. Like, that song did not lie. It's a really beautiful state. It is hot. Like, you've never experienced hot until you've spent a July in Tucson, Arizona. It's ridiculous hot. But anyway, I moved out to Arizona and I started college, and I spent like that first year of college, went to school for music. And of course, immediately, as soon as I started college, it was like unlike any other school experience I had in my life. I loved it. I got so much out of it. It was like taking that innate part of me that existed all the way back from when I was 2 years old. And to just put all the pieces together. I had amazing professors that just, it taught me the ins and outs of music theory, and so much of what I had always understood intuitively. Now I had words to describe it, and I had this vernacular and this language, and I had an understanding, and not of just like knowing it works, but now I knew why it works. So music, going to school for music was a huge highlight of my life. I loved every moment of it. Spent the first year of college with my parents, in their little trailer out there. And then eventually through college, I was hanging around, and I made, it's a new state, made a whole new group of friends, and I got a girlfriend while I was out there and fell in love. we ended up having a child together. So I have one amazing son, Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
And then my music adventure out there was really interesting because, you know, I spent this whole time being this, you know, I'm a metalhead. You know, by the time I was in college, you know, I was just metalhead through and through. There wasn't much metal out in Arizona. But who I did meet in college, of course, it's Arizona, southern border to Mexico. So there's a huge Hispanic population. So I got to meet a lot of people from the Hispanic culture, and I got to learn a lot about Hispanic culture. It's a beautiful culture. I especially love the way that they treat family. It's a whole different thing than what I've experienced here. Like,
yeah,
family is everything in the Hispanic culture, and it's a beautiful thing. So I made a lot of friends that were Hispanic, and I just happened to know this group of friends that I met. I didn't know too well, but they got invited to my 27th birthday party, and they said, "Hey, we know that you play piano. What do you think about like coming to try out for our band?" And they gave me a CD, and I took it home, and it was unlike any other music I had heard before. It was like jam, progressive rock, but it was mixed with like heavy Latin influences, like South American influences. And I was like, man, I don't even know if I can I don't even know what to do with this. Like, it's so outside of anything I've ever done. I don't even know if I can do it. And I kind of almost second guessed even going to try out, but I did go out and try out for them, and I brought my keyboard with me, and we started that jam session, and I think we all knew from the first minute of jamming together that this was something special. The thing about those guys out there, shout out to Andy and Sparky and Eric and Ryan and Mike, Luna. It was the first time in my life I'd ever played with musicians that were way better than me in a lot of ways. I mean, they're just top quality musicians. Now, if you ask them, they would be modest and they would say the same thing about me, but I'm telling you, like, they had chops. I mean, we were all going to school for music. I mean, so it wasn't it wasn't just I was an insane music head and I was in a band with a bunch of guys that liked music. I was in a band with all other music majors. So
yeah,
together we were all really, really good. And it seemed like with the keyboards I brought in, I just added that extra flair. And that band, Grite Leon, a Latin American fusion rock progressive band, it just took off. I mean, it went gangbusters.
I'm curious to jump in here. Sorry, just before you move on. When you tried out, what was that like? Was it like they had some songs they had written, they gave you a CD, you listened to it, and they did not have any keys in it, and they wanted you to see what you can add with keyboards to it? Or did they have our keyboard parts written and they wanted you to see if you could play them?
No.
Were they testing your creativity, or what was it like?
No, they didn't have, there was no keyboards written. They just knew they wanted something like in their music that a keyboard could give. So
gotcha.
The music they gave me on CD was just, drums and guitar and bass and vocals, but it had no keys, and they wanted to see what I could do with it. And so I took that home and listened to it and just kind of created my own flavor to it. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, when I got to the tryout, there was all these caveats. They were like, "Oh, we don't play that song in A anymore. We play in E now." And also this, we took out that part, and they were like, "Crap, we probably should have told you this stuff in advance." But I was able to just click with it on the fly, and as any of them would be able to do. And it was just, I've never been so tight with a group of guys ever. I mean, everybody right. in the band was just so freaking good at what they did. It was an amazing chemistry.
That's cool, man.
And that band became...
So you guys played, you said it was growing really good. So you guys played lots of shows around Tucson area.
Oh yeah. We became really big in Tucson. I mean, at our height, we were probably playing 4 times a week. I'd say we'd play 4 shows every week.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It was to the point where you don't even need to have practice anymore because your shows, like you're playing so many shows. And the cool thing about being in a jam, it was a jam band. So I don't know if you know much about the way jam bands work, but in a jam band, you don't necessarily like this. The song structure is really loose. So, Andy would go and do his guitar solo, but if he was really vibing and he was really feeling it, he might extend that for another 8 bars. Right. And the only way to know if that's going to happen is you just gotta be on a level where you can just feel it. And that's all I can exclaim is like, we'd be on stage playing the show and I would just hear what Andy was doing. And I could tell by the emotion he was conveying through his guitar playing. I was like, he's going to extend this another 8 bars. And then we would all just click right in without even no mistakes, no hitches. Everybody just knew this is going to extend out more. And it was like this weird form of telepathy. And the songs were really fluid like that on stage. We would add entire sections. We would do transitions between songs that we'd never practiced. And it was like it was literally like we could read each other's minds.
It was like you said, the chemistry. I mean, you all were music majors. You studied the same thing. You understand time signature and all the fancy ins and outs. And so you just completely on the same page. That's really cool.
But throughout my time in Arizona, I was having a good time with Greta Leon and things were going awesome. I did not, however, completely lose contact with Aaron Collins. He had been my friend since high school. When he went off to college, I had visited him a few times at University of Toledo, and I had made guest appearances in his project, the Jesus Saves project, and done some stuff for him. And I don't remember exactly what year it was, but I haven't even talked about recording like at all.
I know. I was gonna bring it up, but I didn't want to interrupt the flow of it. So I will, just because you've been talking a lot, I'll kind of introduce that. So throughout all of this, obviously, you record all of the music for Monsters in the Mirror. I mean, and actually most of the music for Monsters in the Mirror you wrote and recorded. So very, very heavy Vince influences in that. And you've been recording for a long time. I mean, that's been this entire story you're telling. I'll give you the chance to kind of explain when it comes in. But like, just to summarize, like, recording has been your bread and butter. It's been your passion you've been going after. And right now, that's one of the key things about Monsters in the Mirror. I mean, you bring so much to the table, and recording is one of them. We don't have to pay thousands of dollars to record our stuff, and it's top notch, really good stuff. So, for brevity's sake, at what point in the timeline did you start recording? Like where in the bands and the story that you've told so far, where did you start? And then was it just something that was kind of going on in the background as you progress?
It was all the way back at the beginning, right from Saturday.
Wow.
It wasn't a few months after that band started. My parents got me my first, it was a digital recorder. I didn't use a computer. There was no software. It was basically all in a box. It was like this silver box, and it had faders and it had mixers on it, and you plugged your instruments into it and you just record all in the box. So, I mean, it started from day one. So that whole story I told, I'm recording throughout this period, and recording is an art form that it takes many, many years to master and get good at it. So early recordings, Saturday, Leading the Wake, they sounded pretty bad to the point where I don't share those recordings with very many people. Yeah.
And is that something you continued? Like, did you record Greta Leon?
Yes. So nice. I recorded, I mean, I was the guy, like all those early bands I've been in were all with either broke high school students or broke college students. And so that was something I always brought to the table in all the bands. They're like, well, we could go to a studio, but we can't really afford to do that. Or, Vince records, we could just have him record our album. So every single band I've ever been in, I was responsible for the recording. And at the beginning, it was terrible and awful. And it just slowly over the years got better and better. Aaron recorded a solo Christian album when he was in college. I recorded that for him as well. Mm-hmm. And then at some point he reached out to me and he was like, "Hey, Vince, I'm in this band now called Paint the Sky Black, and we'd like you to do a song for us." And that was the first time I had actually ever met Dustin Scott.
Yeah, that's where we met.
Actually came out to visit from Arizona to Ohio, and I got to go to the church where you guys were practicing, and that's when I met you. I had brought Cassie, who was my then girlfriend, now ex, mm-hmm. and she actually wrote the lyrics to one of the Paint the Sky Black songs.
Yep. Job.
Yep.
I remember that. I remember, I don't remember you guys being at the church, but I remember that night like very, very clearly, because we went out to eat somewhere. I think it was Steak and Shake we went to after practice. And I think I've told you this before, but I had a little bit of a social faux pas at the time because I was still learning. I've been learning a lot about humans and conflict and stuff. And I was trying to handle band business in front of you and Cassie. So like, me and the band mates, and I had a criticism of one of the members, and I did it in front of you guys, strangers, and it kind of made them look bad. So it was a big moment for me because I was like, oh crap, that's right. Like that was rude for some reason. I don't know why. That was a profound moment for me, but I can picture it all. I remember you and Cassie being there, the whole thing. So, so what made you, transition out of Grite?
So Grite was an amazing band. I love that band. I love all the guys that were part of that band. But Grite had one pretty big downfall that made it difficult to continue with that band. And I don't want to dox anybody here, but basically that downfall was drugs. That's what it was. There was some pretty heavy drug use in that band, and I got involved in it myself as well. So I became a drug user. I became addicted to drugs while I was in that band. I'm not ashamed to admit that. It's just another story. That's what's a part of my life. It shaped my character. I'm glad I survived and made it through.
Right.
I'm glad but I wouldn't say necessarily I even regret it. It's, I learned a lot from the experience, and now I'm on the other side. I'm no longer addicted to drugs. But part of my decision to move back to Ohio was, when you're really steeped into kind of the drug world like that, as much as I love all those friends, there's only one way you're gonna, and if you talk to any like addiction center, addiction counselor, they'll tell you the same thing. If you're gonna get off drugs, then you have to get away from the people that are part of that world that use with you, or else you're never gonna escape it. So that was part of it. My relationship unfortunately ended while I was out there with my girlfriend. But it ended in a pretty amiable way. It was probably one of the most amiable breakup I've ever had. We just kind of both recognized that it wasn't working, that we weren't the best fit for one another, and we made an arrangement for our son so that he gets equal time with her as he does with me. All the while, of course, I had Aaron has a way of heavily encouraging you. Even back before Paint the Sky Black ended, Aaron had always said, like, someday, Vince, like, I'm prophesying it. You're going to come back to Ohio. We're going to start the most amazing band ever. And it's going to be awesome. Like, I'm telling you, it's happening. Like, this is before, like, when he first said that to me, I was just like, man, I don't know if I'll ever move back to Ohio. Like, I'm in a new state now. I'm doing a new thing. I have a girlfriend. I have a family. Like, I kind of thought he was crazy.
And what's funny is the whole time that he was telling you that, he was also telling me that. Like, I don't remember where it all began or whatever. I just know it was a constant thing. It was constant where Aaron was saying, I'm claiming it, dude. It's going to happen. Go ahead. You can laugh, whatever. Vince, he's happy. He's got his stuff going on there. I'm telling you, he's coming home and we're going to start a band together. And like, he always included me in that as well. And especially after we recorded that song for Paint the Sky Black and it turned out so well, like, especially that was like, ooh, look how we jived. Look what we created together. And so then it was always just, I'm prophesying it. It's happening. And I mean, that was probably even while you're in Grete and everything. So very funny. It's, the question I always ask myself with Aaron is, does he prophesy things and then, oh, wow, he predicted the future and it actually happened? Or does he prophesy something and then does he manipulate and pressure and push until it happens? So he makes the future happen.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Chicken or the egg?
I'm tempted to think the latter, but I could be wrong. He could have some sort of gift, some ability, because I tell you, that's not the only thing he's ever said that's come true. He's done it a lot. Right. He's done it with a lot of things. Aaron often makes very accurate predictions about the future, and it's a little scary, to be honest. But I think Paint the Sky Black ended like around the time that I was reaching my tail end of my time in Arizona. I think it might have been a few years prior. But I remember it was after Paint the Sky Black had already broken up. I think Aaron was focused on AC sound, and then eventually he went to get his CRNA degree. I'm not sure what you were doing. I know you were involved in AC sound to some degree, but it was at some point Aaron called me and he was like, hey, I know you're still in Arizona, but what if we could find a way to record together over 2,200 mile distance? And what if we brought Saturday back? But this time I have Dustin, and of course, like he talked you up. I mean, I didn't know you at all, but he's like, trust me, you guys are going to be awesome friends. You guys are going to love each other. What's the funny thing is we did not love each other at first. Not at all. It's just
too much alike.
It's just another example of Aaron being oddly perceptive. Like, right. We didn't get along at first because we both had flaws, and we honed in on each other's flaws, and we were like, I don't want anything to do with that. But Aaron saw past both of our flaws, and he knew that if we could see past each other's flaws, that we would learn to love each other. And he ended up being right about that too.
Yep. Hate to give the guy credit, but he's right again. So that's kind of how things came together for us. And so this part of the story can kind of, and we're at like an hour and 15 now. So the ball kind of spins a little faster now, but like, long story short, we recorded Silent Killer, which is, our first song that Monsters in the Mirror. It's out on Spotify and streaming now. Still currently or whatever, but we recorded that from 2,200 miles away. I mean, you were in Arizona, we were here. I would drive to Toledo and we'd have these video chats together. We would try to track things as best we could on our end. It was usually probably not very good quality. And then you had to like Rumpelstiltskin, just take the crap that we send you and turn it into gold. And you did. And Silent Killer, like, I know you're not as proud of it now, but I still I love that song so much. I love the way it's written. I love how it sounds. And that was like the beginning of a beautiful band.
Do you remember our first session trying to do Silent Killer and get all the technology to work?
Yeah. We made zero progress.
We spent Dustin drove 2 hours up from his house to Aaron's house. I was connected on the other end in Arizona. We must have spent 8 to 10 hours trying to get the technology to work, and we failed. Like literally we accomplished nothing. And we all felt so defeated. I just remember it was just, we all felt so low at the end of that session. But somehow we persevered. We didn't give up. We kept at it, and we produced both Silent Killer and Anger from Arizona, and Sun.
That's right. We did do Anger too, didn't we?
And Sun as well. Although that's not part of the MITM canon currently.
Yeah, I forgot about that song. Yeah, so then from there, it was just kind of like, I don't know if we kind of talked about this in Aaron's episode. It was kind of, from my perspective, it's kind of a lot like what you described with the original Shatterday and then Leading the Wake. It was like started as Shatterday, and then it was like working through all the kinks of what is this actually going to be, and who's actually going to be involved, and who's going to have what responsibilities. Because, it started as Shatterday, and it started with me trying to like be the guy who's like scheduling everything and like being the taskmaster kind of guy. And that brought out an ugly side of me for sure, until I ended up leaving because it just felt like, but like through those transition, we brought Nick in as a drummer, and then you guys at some point changed the name to Monsters in the Mirror, and then a period of time went by, I don't know how long, and that's when I came back. But it's like that connection, that you and Aaron getting back together, and then just working out the personality kinks between you, me, and Nick, and that sort of thing has made it so that we can come together now as Monsters in the Mirror. And it's cool. We're older. We're all, like getting up there, in our 30s and everything. And we all have careers. We're not these poor teenagers anymore. And all of our experiences have led us to this point. And now it's like, we understand each other a little more. And like you said about you and I, like we're friends now. We understand each other's flaws, and we can show grace to each other and all that kind of stuff. And so I guess, is there anything else you want to add about that kind of section to get us to where we are now?
All I can say is it's been a bumpy road for this band. We have had many a conflict. I don't know what it is about being an adult, but like being a full grown adult and being a parent and trying to fit this whole band thing into your life as a responsible adult and as a parent. It's difficult. It's a lot harder than it was back in high school. It's more stressful. It's easier to just kind of get upset and angry when you don't feel like somebody is like respecting your time or something like that.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Like,
it's like time is so much more limited now that it's more valuable and important to us all. So it's easier to get butthurt about stuff because time. So, I mean, you left the band for a time. Nick left the band for a time. I left the band for a time. And somehow we all recognized through that we do have something special here between all of us and all of our abilities. Mm-hmm. And that I think we've kind of all recognized that it really the four of us, just kind of the way I felt about Grite, about how special that group was. I mean, they were special for a certain reason. I had certain, everything I mentioned about the way we could telepathically feel each other and everything. MITM, I feel like this particular grouping of people is just as special, but just for different reasons. Everything that Nick brings to the table as far as, business and marketing and stuff like that is just something that Grite could have never even dreamed of having. It's just his skill in that area is unmatched. Like I said, Aaron's just the best vocalist that I've ever even known. And you're kind of this chameleon that,
you just kind of shift into these areas and you're good in every area. Like, I don't have to worry about backup singing for Aaron most of the time because you're such a good vocalist that like you not only can cover backup, but you can cover lead on some stuff. And if I need somebody to really help me buckle down on studio and recording stuff, then I know that you'll come over here and not only will you'll be enthusiastic about it, but you also just come with a really detailed ear and you pick up on stuff that I don't pick up on, and you come with really good ideas, and the recordings turn out better as a result for having like all of your input. And then you turn around and you go and you help Nick with social media and business and marketing and PR and all that stuff. And I've heard you self-deprecate before and say that, you know, like, you know, you don't have anything as special because you're not an expert or whatever. You're like, but you're this key element that fits everywhere in the band. You can literally go and help any of us with anything that we're doing. And your input is extremely valuable in every area. So I really do think there would be gigantic holes if you weren't here. So, I
appreciate it, man.
Just a shout out to you there.
Well, it's like you said, I think the four of us kind of realize that we have something magical here, and that's not to sound cocky or conceited or anything, but it's like, even just for us, for nobody else, the four of us need to create. We need to do music. And we found that this is the group to do it with. It's not really going to happen anywhere else. Like we finally have magic in a bottle. And so, and I think there's a little bit of an idea too of like, I think we've all kind of been the guy in various bands in the past of like having to be the guy pushing it forward, having to like do everything and carry and whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so I do think there was an element of that, definitely for me, when you get four of those guys together. You get four of the guy, four guys who have always had to like push things forward. And now they have to work together. And that means like I've realized big time, I have to get out of Nick's way. Like I have to get out of your way. I need to say yes more and not think that I need to steer so much, like those kinds of things. So I'm confident, I'm hopeful about the future and everything because of that.
Yeah. I really think we worked out a lot of the kinks. I mean, we've always gelled really well musically. That's never been an issue. It was just some personality kinks. We had to get to know each other. We had to understand each other's flaws. We had to learn to be graceful with each other, and we had to learn how to communicate. It was all that stuff. That was the challenge. And I really think I'm not saying that like everybody has conflicts. We'll come up against other stuff, but it seems like now every time something does come up, we do a little bit better job of communicating and understanding each other. And it's anytime something does come up, it's less of an issue than it would have been like 2 years ago, you know?
Yep. We're getting better. Well, and hopefully that's, I guess, to kind of wrap this up, like the purpose of this podcast, and I'm going to explain it in other episodes too, but I want the first 4 episodes to talk about each of us just to kind of help people understand how we got to where we are, and it explains our personalities here. But I really want to use this podcast. Hopefully it's entertaining for people, but I also want to sort of document our journey. I mean, I would like, after the first 4 episodes, I want to talk with Aaron about how do we do this band thing as grown men with families, and talk about how we've tried to structure that and the things we've tried and the things we've learned and you know, the things we learn along the way. Like we've learned a bunch, how we handle money, how we like all these things. So I just kind of want to document our journey, because if nothing else, this will be a fun thing to look back on in the future. Like, look, it's all documented here.
Absolutely. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to hear my story. It was a long one. I didn't intend for it to be this long, but
hey, that's all right. It was very good.
My story spans pretty much my entire life. So